on social using the hashtag What's Next Summit. Up next, we have a segment where we're going to learn about technologies that help us measure and optimize how we occupy space. Joining me on the stage is Andrew Farah, the co-founder and CEO of Density. Andrew. Andrew, Density has developed a technology that can empower a company, a city, to better understand how people occupy space, how we can better optimize it. Let's think about that at scale. One interesting stat, globally, we have about 11,000 buildings being built every day. It accounts for about 39% of carbon emissions. Explain to us, what would it look like if we had Density's technology deployed in every city so that they can understand how people are occupying and optimizing their space?
I mean, I would be retired, most likely. But I think, just for some clarity, we build a radar system that essentially understands or makes sense of how humans use space, so counts people in spaces like this. And we do so anonymously, so it's not a camera-based system. I don't know that the scale of space is obvious to everybody. In the US, there's 10.9 billion square feet of leased or owned corporate office space, and 41% of that is vacant but paid for, meaning about $1 trillion of space is essentially sitting there with nobody in it. You know, it's like the conference room that doesn't get used, or the cafe that's not touched, or the workstation that's untouched. And that was pre-pandemic. So post-pandemic, in sort of a hybrid world, the need to understand how space is used becomes sort of increasingly important. And I would imagine, like, what's really exciting is being able to have a feedback loop on how a city is used. You know, what would happen if New York City all of a sudden knew how it was used is a very exciting thing to contemplate. And I think largely everything would change. You know, energy use would change, access would change, the physical design of the space itself would change, and ultimately it would end in, you know, the modified skylines of cities, which is really exciting.
Oh, that's exciting. Another topic that's top of mind for many of us is the return to work, the return to the office. You know, every CEO in America right now is battling with this conversation and thinking about what is the best solution, what does the future of work look like. From that context, like, what's the one big thing that you would share? What advice would you give executives who are right now grappling with this challenge of what the future of work is going to look like?
You know, I think we've sort of invested heavily in the technologies that companies are investing heavily in the technologies that are going to help bring folks back to the office, and investing in the technologies that are going to help people do distributed work of some kind. But I think there's like a really important set of questions about how do we want to make some of the work that we do in office look more like the work that we've been able to do distributed. So at least in our own offices, you know, you walk in and literally everybody is on Zoom with other folks in different offices around the country. Yeah. How do you facilitate work where you have this very strange mix of in-person and distributed? And I think Stuart mentioned it in his last sort of interview about, you know, I'll show up to an executive team meeting and, you know, everyone in the room will be on their own sort of video because it's more equitable, it's easier for the team to hear everybody, and so forth. And I think those types of changes are less about, like, how do we change to support distributed work, and instead, like, what is distributed work teaching us about how to design physical spaces that we're in the same place about.
Yeah. And then the other thing, you know, for Density and for you, privacy is a big thing. So how can we get the answers that we need to make sure that we can advance and progress the built environment without compromising or creating a surveillance state? What can you share with us about that?
Well, this was mentioned at sort of the roundtable a little bit earlier, but I'm reasonably certain there isn't a future in which we continue to use buildings, continue to design and sort of occupy buildings, and don't figure out how they're used. It's just a question of whether or not we end up with, like, an accidental mass surveillance state, you know? There are far greater things than deploying cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
And just to be crystal clear, we do not design cameras. Sorry, we do not design cameras. But far greater changes have been made to policy and law and regulation and requirements on companies than distributing the infrastructure for mass surveillance. And the pandemic is a phenomenal excuse to say, well, let's just measure it all with some type of optical system. And I think if we're not careful, this sort of like, and I'm setting density aside, but like this sort of massive acceleration in investing in new infrastructure for buildings and cities that the pandemic has caused could result in something that we all very much don't like, which is centralized understanding of who you are and where you've been and how long you were there and so forth. And that is not a world that I would like to live in. And so at least as we think about our own product development, we like to use the concept of, does this person or do these people or occupants have a reasonable expectation to privacy? Because if the answer is ever yes, you should be deploying something that is anonymous at source, meaning like no gender, no age, no ethnicity at source, incapable of measurement. Because you're then sort of operating under the assumption that a vendor is going to eventually get compromised. So that, I don't know if anybody remembers the Target hack of 2013 or something like that. It was 300 million addresses and credit card numbers. It was one of the largest compromises in history. And the way that Target got compromised was through one of their vendors. It was a Fabricio Mechanical or Fazio Mechanical or something like that. It was a refrigeration company. And they got access to the refrigeration company. They got access then to Target's vendor portal, and they found all of this data in plain text. So the same thing will happen with whatever the infrastructure may be at some point. And it would be much better if at source, when you got to it, you had something that was anonymous as opposed to something that could call out individuals.
Yeah. Bringing Density's technology closer to the event, I know the Density crew came to the venue. Can you share more with us what they did and why it matters?
Yeah. So our current technology, it sort of looks like the Marauders map from Harry Potter. It's pretty cool. It's like a floor plan, and then like humans are sort of measured in three-dimensional point clouds, and you all move around. We all move around. I'm a human. And one of the things that we did prior to this event, because the space was so beautiful, is we had our Helix team come in, which does, and I think I heard it in the previous talk, a digital twin, and walk the building. And so what you're about to see, don't go quite yet, but what you're about to see is essentially, it is not a video, so it's not sort of 3D cameras, although that is one of the sensors. It is essentially like down to the centimeter measurements of a space. So I guess, I think let's take a look is the cue that I'm supposed to give. Let's take a look. So this is where we are right now. And this was done with a sort of a Voltron-looking sort of shoulder-mounted scanning system. And what it creates is essentially a near perfect replica of like this building or any building. And what's exciting is that you're sort of moving beyond, this is essentially the evolution of a floor plan. So instead of having a two-dimensional line drawing that you've updated 9 times and it's a PNG or a PDF and it's not quite exactly a scale or whatnot, you now have something that you could navigate that looks kind of like a video game, which I think is cool. And what you're going to see a little bit later this year is, this is where we're sitting. Yeah.
That says right there.
And now this is a video that you're looking at, but it's actually a navigable system. So like you can, go through and move around and whatnot. I should say this is very, very. That's a lot of density. It's a very, very early sort of. We recently sort of acquired a company that does this, and what's cool is that when you marry utilization data with what actual reality is represented as, you can start to do some really cool things. Like, we've noticed that, all conference rooms that have a whiteboard seem to get used, 98% of the day, and all those without a whiteboard don't. Let's just replay the day and see how humans in sort of 3 dimensions move through this space is something that is going to become possible in the next few years.
Excellent. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us for such a great conversation. We will take a 15-minute break. There's snacks outside, and we'll be back here in a few. Thank you.
Thank you.